Chapter 22, wherein we are shown the interior of a Bric-a-Brac shop, and see how Père Guinardon's guilty happiness is marred by the jealousy of a love-lorn dame. Père Guinardon, as Zéphyrin had faithfully reported to Monsieur Sariette, smuggled out the pictures, furniture, and curios stored in his attic. In the rustic princess, his studio he called it, and used them to stock a shop he had taken in the Rue de Courcelles. Thither he went to take up his abode, leaving Zéphyrin, with whom he had lived for 50 years without a bed or a saucepan or a penny to call her own, except 18 pence the poor creature had in her purse. Père Guinardon opened an old picture and curiosity shop, and in it he installed the fair Octavie. The shop front presented an attractive appearance. There were Flemish angels in green copes, after the manner of Gerard David, a Salome of the Luini school, a Saint Barbara in painted wood of French workmanship, Limoges enameled work, Bohemian and Venetian glass, dishes from Urbino. There were specimens of English point lace, which, if her tale was true, had been presented to Zéphyrin in the days of her radiant girlhood by the Emperor Napoleon III. Within, there were golden articles that glinted in the shadows, while pictures of Christ, the apostles, high-bred dames, and nymphs also presented themselves to the gaze. There was one canvas that was turned face to the wall, so that it should only be looked at by connoisseurs, and concierges are scarce. It was a replica of Fragonard's Gimblette, a brilliant painting that looked as if it had barely had time to dry. Papa Guinardon himself remarked on the fact. At the far end of the shop was a king wood cabinet, the drawers of which were full of all manner of treasures. Watercolors by Bauduin, 18th century books of illustrations, miniatures, and so forth. But the real masterpiece, the marvel, the gem, the pearl of great price, stood upon an easel. Veiled from public view, it was a coronation of the Virgin by Fra Angelico, an exquisitely delicate thing, in gold and blue and pink. Père Guinardon was asking 100,000 francs for it. Upon a Louis XV chair, besides an emperor work table on which stood a vase of flowers, sat the fair Octavie, broidery in hand, she having left her glistering rags behind her, and the garnet in the Rue Princesse no longer presented the appearance of a touched-up Rembrandt, but shone, rather, with the soft radiance and limpidity of a Vermeer of Delft, for the delectation of the connoisseurs who frequented the shop of Papa Guinardon. Tranquil and demure, she remained alone in the shop all day, while the old fellow himself was up aloft, working away at the deuce knows what picture. About 5 o'clock he used to come downstairs and have a chat with the habitués of the establishment. The most regular caller was Comte This mason, a thin, cadaverous man, a strain of hair issued from the deep hollow under each cheekbone, and broadening as it descended, shed upon his chin and chest torrents of snow in which he was forever trailing his long, fleshless, gold-ringed fingers. For 20 years, he had been mourning the loss of his wife, who had been carried off by consumption in the flower of her youth and beauty. Since then, he had spent his whole life in endeavoring to hold converse with the dead and in filling his lonely mansion with second-rate paintings. His confidence in Guinardon knew no bounds. Another client who was a scarcely less frequent visitor to the shop was Monsieur Blancmesnel, a director of a large financial establishment. He was a florid, prosperous-looking man of 50. He took no great interest in matters of art, and was perhaps an indifferent connoisseur. But in his case, it was the fair Octavie, seated in the middle of the shop, like a songbird in its cage, that offered the attraction. Monsieur Blancmesnil soon established relations with her, a fact which Père Guinardon alone failed to perceive, for the old fellow was still young in his love affair with Octavie. Monsieur Gaetan d'Esparvu used to pay occasional visits to Père Guinardon's shop out of mere curiosity, for he strongly suspected the old man of being a first-rate faker. And then that doughty swordsman, Monsieur Le Truc de Raffec, also came to see the old antiquary on one occasion and acquainted him with the plan he had on foot. Monsieur Le Truc de Raffec was getting up a little historical exhibition of small arms at the Petit Palais in aid of the fund for the education of the native children in Morocco, and wanted Père Guinardon to lend him a few of the most valuable articles in his collection. Our first idea, he said, was to organize an exhibition to be called The Cross and the Sword. The juxtaposition of the two words will make the idea which has prompted our undertaking sufficiently clear to you. It was an idea preeminently patriotic and Christian, which led us to associate the sword, which is the symbol of honor, with the cross, which is the symbol of salvation. It was hoped that our work would be graced by the distinguished patronage of the Minister of War and Monsignor Ketchpot. Moreover, unfortunately, there were difficulties in the way, and the full realization of the project had to be deferred. In the meantime, we are limiting our exhibition to the sword. I have drawn up an explanatory note indicating the significance of the demonstration. Having delivered himself of these remarks, Monsieur Le Truc de Raffec produced a pocket case stuffed full of papers, picked out from a medley of judgment summons and other odds and ends, a little piece of very crumpled paper. He exclaimed, "Ah, here it is," and proceeded to read as follows: "The sword is a fierce virgin. It is par excellence the Frenchman's weapon. And now, when patriotic sentiment, after suffering an all too protracted eclipse, I'll start the sentence again. And now when patriotic sentiment, after suffering an all too protracted eclipse, is beginning to shine forth again more ardently than ever. And so forth, you see. And he repeated his request for some really fine specimen to be placed in the most conspicuous position in the exhibition to be held on behalf of the little native children of Morocco, of which General de Esparvu was to be honorary president. Arms and armor were by no means Père Guinardon's strong point. He dealt principally in pictures, drawings, and books, but he was never to be taken unawares. He took down a rapier with a gilt colander-shaped hilt, and a highly typical piece of workmanship of the Louis XIII to Napoleon III period, and presented it to the exhibition promoter. While contemplating it with respect, maintained a diplomatic silence. I have something better still in here, said the antiquary, and he produced from his inner shop, where it had been lying among the walking sticks and umbrellas, a real demon of a sword, adorned with fleur-de-lis, a genuine royal relic. It was the sword of Philippe Auguste, as worn by an actor at the Odeon when Agnès de Marigny was being performed in 1846. Guinardon held it, point downwards, as though it were a cross, clasping his hands piously on the crossbar. He looked as loyal as the sword itself. Have her for your exhibition, said he. The damsel is well worth it. Bovines is her name. If I find a buyer for it, said Monsieur le Preux de Refec, twirling his enormous mustachios, I suppose you will allow me a little commission. Some days later, Père Guinardon was mysteriously displaying a picture to the Comte de Maisons and Monsieur Blancmesnil. It was a newly discovered work of El Greco, an amazingly fine example of the master's latter style. It represented a Saint Francis of Assisi standing erect upon Monte Alverno. He was mounting heavenward like a column of smoke and was plunging into the regions of the clouds, a monstrously narrow head that the distance rendered smaller still. In fine, it was a real, very real, nay, too real El Greco. The two collectors were attentively scrutinizing the work, while Père Guinardon was belauding the depth of the shadows and the sublimity of the expression. He was raising his arms aloft to convey an idea of greatness of Theotocopuli, who, derived from Tintoretto, whom, however, he surpassed in loftiness by 100 cubits. He was chaste and pure and strong, a mystic, a visionary. Comte Desmaison declared that El Greco was his favorite painter. In his innermost heart, Blancmesnil was not so entirely struck with it. The door opened, and Monsieur Gaetan quite unexpectedly appeared on the scene. He gave a glance at the Saint Francis and said, "Bless my soul." Monsieur Blancmesnil, anxious to improve his knowledge, asked him what he thought of the artist who was now so much in vogue. Gaetan replied glibly enough that he did not regard El Greco as the eccentric, the madman that people used to take him for. It was rather his opinion that a defect of vision from which Theotocopuli suffered compelled him to deform his figures. Being afflicted with astigmatism and strabismus, Gaetan went on. He painted the things he saw exactly as he used to see them. Comte de Maison was not readily disposed to accept so natural an explanation, which, however, by its simplicity, highly commended itself to Monsieur Blancmesnil. Père Guinardon, beside himself, exclaimed, "Are you going to tell me, Monsieur d'Esparvu, that St. John was astigmatic because he beheld a woman clothed with the sun, crowned with stars, with the moon about her feet, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 angels robed in white linen, that bore the 7 cups filled with the wrath of the living God?" "After all," said Monsieur Gaeton, by way of conclusion, "people are right in admiring El Greco if he had genius enough to impose his morbidity of vision upon them. By the same token, the contortions to which he subjects the human countenance may give satisfaction to those who love suffering, a class more numerous than is generally supposed." "Monsieur," replied the Comte de Maison, stroking his luxuriant beard with his long thin hand, we must love those that love us. Suffering loves us and attaches itself to us. We must love it if life is to be supportable to us. In the knowledge of this truth lies the strength and value of Christianity. Alas, I do not possess the gift of faith. It is that which drives me to despair." The old man thought of her for whom he had been mourning 20 years, and forthwith his reason left him, and his thoughts abandoned themselves unresistingly to the morbid imaginings of gentle and melancholy madness. Having, he said, made a study of psychic matters, and having, with the cooperation of a favorable medium, carried out experiments concerning the nature and duration of the soul, he had obtained some remarkable results, which, however, did not afford him complete satisfaction. He had succeeded in viewing the soul of his dead wife under the appearance of a transparent and gelatinous mass, which bore not the slightest resemblance to his adored one. The most painful part about the whole experiment, which he had repeated over and over again, was that the gelatinous mass, which was furnished with a number of extremely slender tentacles, maintained them in constant motion in time to a rhythm apparently intended to make certain signs. But of what these movements were supposed to convey, there was not the slightest clue. During the whole of this narrative, Monsieur Blancmesnil had been whispering in a corner with the youthful Octavie, who sat mute and still, with her eyes on the ground. Now, Zéphirine had by no means made up her mind to resign her lover into the hands of an unworthy rival. She would often go round of a morning with her shopping basket on her arms, and prowl about outside the curio shop, torn betwixt grief and rage. Tormented by warring ideas, she sometimes thought she would empty a saucepan of vitriol on the head of the faithless one. At others, that she would fling herself at his feet, and shower tears and kisses on his precious hands. One day she was thus eyeing her Michael, her beloved but guilty Michel. She noticed through the window this fair and youthful Octavie, who was sitting with her embroidery at a table upon which, in a vase of crystal, a rose was swooning to death. Zéphirine, in a transport of fury, brought down her umbrella on her rival's fair head, and called her a female dog and a trollop. Octavie fled in terror, and ran for the police, while Zéphirine, beside herself with grief and love, kept digging away with her old damp at the gimbalette of Fragonard. The Pelaginus, St. Francis of El Greco, the virgins, the nymphs, the apostles, and not the guilt off the Fra Angelico, shrieking all the while. All those pictures there, the El Greco, the Beato Angelico, the Fragonard, the Gerard David, and the Balduins. Guinardon painted the whole lot of them himself, the wretch, the scoundrel, the Fra Angelico there. Why, I saw him painting it on my ironing board. And that Gerard David he executed on an old midwife's signboard. You and that female dog of yours, why, I'll do for the pair of you just as I'm doing for these pictures. And tugging away at the coat of an aged collector who, trembling all over, had hidden himself in the darkest corner of the shop, she called him to witness to the crimes of Guinardon, perjurer and impostor. The police is simply to tear her out of the ruined shop. As she was being taken off to the station, followed by a great crowd of people, she raised her fiery eyes to heaven, crying in a voice choked with sobs, "But don't you know, Michel, if you knew him, you would understand that it is impossible to live without him. Michel, he's handsome and good and charming. He is a very god. He is love itself. And I love him, I love him, I love him. I have known men high up in the world, dukes, ministers of state, and higher still. Not one of them was worthy to clean the mud off of Michel's boots. My God, kind sirs, give him back to me again. And my good, well, yeah, people exaggerate in their emotional and mental issues, and they enact those issues in buying things they don't need or their attachment to objects beyond their mere use.